No, I'm just gonna check.
Oh, and that thing that you wrote, I cried. I looked at new email, new mascara. I'm like running out of nouns. Want to interview me? Oh
Yes.
my God.
I'm glad we caught you this early in the day.
Yeah,
Right, so
yeah, I've got an Anderson, I've got a bookstore live event going on in an hour. I'm like shot.
oh my goodness.
Okay.
All right, so we are live on Facebook, and as people kind of catch up, if you want to just take a minute, if you're watching this, I know we had a bunch of RSVPs, please take a moment and just say hello and maybe give us one word that sums up how you're doing today in this moment as you're showing up. And we'll just wait for a minute as people join us. And while we're waiting, and just welcoming my special guest today, Michele Borba.
This is fun.
Excellent, excellent. This is awesome. And actually, I'm going to hit record before I forget, because I post these also in my YouTube channel after the fact. So I'm going to do that. Okay. So people are starting to join us. So again, welcome. Feel free to say hello in the thread. If you have questions for Michele, you can post there, but also if you want to just share with us where you're watching this from, and maybe one word to summarize how you're doing today. And before we get started, a few introductions. So there's actually a ton of new people in this group. So if you don't know me or you haven't seen me live, I'm Debbie Reber. I'm the person behind this amazing community of just generous, brave, awesome humans raising differently wired kids. I'm the founder of Chill Parenting. My book is Differently Wired. I don't have a copy of that nearby, but I do have a copy of my friend Michele Borba's book. And she is joining us today. I'm so happy about that. And I'm going to just tell you a little bit about Michele. And I could go on, but I'm going to try to be succinct. So Michele is an educational psychologist with a doctorate in educational counseling and psychology and an MA in learning disabilities. She's totally our person. She gets our community. And she's the author of 24 books for parents and educators, including Unselfie, Building Moral Intelligence, The Big Book of Parenting Solutions, and of course, the book we're talking about today, which is just hot off the presses on Tuesday. It's called Thrivers, The Surprising Reasons Why Some Kids Struggle and Others Shine. That's what we're going to be talking about today. I'll also just say Michele is a Today Show contributor. She's a spokesperson. And you kind of had a big day. Didn't you have like a big media appearance today?
I did.
Can you tell us about that?
The Today Show was this morning, and it was just absolutely fun. I love that show is so fun to do. And right this minute, Dr. Phil is airing. We did an hour I did an hour with Dr. Phil, and it was absolutely mind-bogglingly wonderful. They brought in a mom and a daughter who were having problems connecting. And a very sad thing is that the beginning of this book, Thrivers, started with me getting a phone call from some very distraught parents from Arizona. This is a bad way to start this, but they said, you've got to come and help us. We're living in a suicide belt. We are in a 20-mile radius, and 40 kids have killed themselves in 20 years. It's 2 years. And they brought those mothers onto the show. They did, and they said if we had it all over again, we would have put all our efforts into resilience and raising thrivers. Wow, just so sad, but they were blessed them because they really said this has got to be, parents need a reset to realize something very amiss is happening with American kids.
Yeah.
Prior to the pandemic.
Right.
So in any case, let's move on. We can do this, Debbie.
Yes. And your book could not be more timely. And I'm just looking at we have people feeling overwhelmed, people feeling stressed, the words of the day. And actually, I sent out a newsletter earlier today where I talked about the definition of resilience. I said, and this is according to the American Psychological Association, that resilience is adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. And what I said and what I hear is that is really not how many of us raising neurologically atypical kids would describe the capabilities of our kids. So I guess even just to start there, what would you say to people who are watching this who feel that resilience is just something their kid does not have? at all.
No, the most important reason why I wrote Thrivers is I started with kids who were atypical, my special education kids. And the most important thing I learned, always from them, never from a textbook, is that every kid can shine a little brighter. The goal isn't the copy, let's all make everybody look the same. That isn't it. And we always have to parent by the child, right? But resilience to me is a child who goes from where they are, faces the adversity and handles it in their own way. And every kid is going to be a little different, but the goal is to help the kid go, I got this a little better than what I did yesterday. That's what it is. And we can do that.
And we can do that. So if you're watching this, this is possible. And we know that our kids are on different timelines than might be considered typical, and they develop so unevenly and asynchronistically. And so I just want to start this conversation by saying that if you are not seeing, if you wouldn't describe your child as resilient right now, absolutely there is hope, absolutely they can get there. And that's really what Michelle's book helps us figure out how to do. So
I think the most important thing, I'm going to go on jumping on you on that
Please
one, because
do.
you are so right on the mark. Too often we try to jump the expectations level. We always go from where the child is. We always scaffold a little bit more. And the analogy is take the child wherever he is right this second and think of a rubber band. Keep stretching from where the child is, not from brother or sister or the kid next door. Keep stretching, but don't snap. Take any of the ideas from Thrivers. They would work for any child, but adapt them down, adapt them up. That's the whole goal of what we do for parenting anyway, right? We take science-backed stuff and we go, what's going to work for my kid?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things that you talk about in this book are character strengths, and you actually, I meant to print them out, and I actually did, but I printed it on the wrong side of the paper. So it won't look very good, but you have some great resources. And I'll just say that if you go to the show notes for the episode for this week, where Michelle and I have a conversation, that's at tiltparenting.com/session 244. I'll post it in the thread here, but there are some PDFs that Michelle has shared from her book, but one of them is about character strengths. So can you talk about the relevance of character strengths and resiliency?
Well, good question, because every question from a parent is, so how do you build resilience? And first, we're going to break the myth that it's locked into our kids' DNA or their temperament. Any child we can teach them the skills of resilience. But number two is, what's it made up of? If it's not made up of DNA, what I then looked at is actually some phenomenal bits of research that I don't think we've been ever handed as parents. There's a teams of researchers, psychologists, who have been tracking kids with enormously adverse conditions, from poverty to sexual abuse to, oh my God, just stuff that you'd be up all night just worrying about how the kid got through it. And they studied them for 40, 50 years, from birth to growing up, and were shocked that 1/3 of them made it, despite the adversity, what was going on in their lives. And they found that the single most important thing is every kid already has, that's in your tribe right now, they have a you. You got to have a parent who refuses to give up on that child and advocates no matter what for that kid. But the second thing is protective buffers. Buffers that were kind of arm the kid so that I've got a different skill set than knowledge, but skills in case I have this, what can I do? There were 7 strengths then, once I realized it was teachable, that I started putting on Post-its all across my dining room table, and to try to get them down to which ones matter. Confidence is the first one. And maybe that's where it all starts with. Confidence to me isn't that sugar-coated self-esteem thing. It's knowledge of your strengths. Parents, for some of the kids where your children, it may be you pointing that out to the child, or you recognizing that's the kid's strength. I don't care if it's violin, or he likes to do drum, or she loves to draw. What's that child's strength? That's the first thing. The second one is empathy, feeling with another person, or kind of a social competence level, because Thrivers think we, not me. And teams like friends, they don't need to be hugely popular, but at least one little loyal buddy who's on their team is enormously helpful for resilience. Third is self-control. That's going to be a hard one, but that's okay. What we've looked at is that there are certain kinds of things we can do just to help the child calm a little more or self-soothe, even if you're the self-soother. Simply, you got to take that to where it is. Then comes integrity. At least it's a moral code of, here's what we stand for in our house. in our house, this is what we're about. Then comes curiosity and openness of a sense of wonder. And so many of your kids do, they just have this wonderful glow of, I'm going there. Doesn't mean they're Albert Einsteins. It means they have an openness. Then comes perseverance, just stretching the child from a little bit longer. And finally comes hope and optimism, keeping their hope alive. And the big question every parent's going to wonder is, which one do I start with, or which one matters most? It's a rare kid that has all 7. So don't go there. This isn't what we're about. We're trying to figure out what your child needs to shine a little more, and go with the strength he already has, then add on one more at a time until you can give him a little bit more of a shine more, struggle less factor.
Thank you for walking us through those. I'm wondering, in the midst of what we're all experiencing, do you see one of these as being the most important for our kids' mental health as they're dealing with the pandemic?
Yeah, 3 of them. They're absolutely, it's a trifecta. Empathy, because they've been so isolated and lonely, and empathy needs to be practiced. Why so many of our kids are worried right now is because they haven't had the chance to go, hi, how are you, hello. And so their fear factors are up when they go back to a school site or back with friends. That is critical. A second one, I think, as kids get a little older, is the optimism and hope, because that pessimism can be pervasive to kids and really do damage to their mental health when it becomes permanent and not temporary, because every kid's going to have a bad day, as to us. What happens is it robs them of that hope for the life. Self-control is always a factor, because the stress starts to build. Take the child where they're at, but we're seeing the biggest concern right now for our kids when they've been social distance and even at home is their sleep patterns have changed dramatically. So that's really doing, we would have thought they would done better. Actually, it's the reverse, says a new study that just came out. So it's maybe helping them regulate back to whatever their schedule is they need to keep them a little calmer.
So just for people who are just joining us, I'm here with Michele Borba. I'm Debbie Reber. This is Michele. We're talking about Michelle's awesome new book, Thrivers, which just came out this week. We're talking about resiliency in kids. If you have a question for Michele, feel free to share it in the chat here. I did get a couple questions in advance, and one of them actually was about emotional regulation. That is a struggle, right?
Oh, in this, sure it is.
Yeah, and so, you know, any thoughts on how to support kids who are especially challenged with that emotional regulation, learning how to pause before they react, or for kids who may even be delayed with their language, and so that kind of self-awareness isn't as developed?
Well, the bottom line to that one, Debbie, is we got to start where the child is. And the first step to all of that regulation is actually us, with our empathy, figuring out what the kid needs and stepping into their shoes. I would suggest, I always did with parents, is track it. If you can just get a calendar, it's so simple. Don't let the kid know you're watching, but just track. And the tracking would be, your kid isn't stressed all the time. But if you watch, you'll begin to see a pattern of, when is he a little bit more on edge, or when is she really, really irritable? Keep doing that day by day and hour by hour. And actually what you always see is a pattern that you may have missed. Gosh, she's more on edge at 10 o'clock in the morning. Why? Maybe that's when a certain lesson is coming up, or that a daycare worker that they don't seem to be eye to eye with, or maybe it's 3 o'clock and the nap schedule got changed, or there's a need for just a food beverage, little things that we may be overlooking. That's the first piece. And then realizing that over and over again, this is the hardest thing, is that too often with the self-control and regulation, we try to teach it to the kid, when in reality, the kid mirrors us. So the hardest part of all of this is figuring out what works for you and maybe doing it with your child. There's all different kinds. For some kids, we know that Tiffany Fields from University of Miami says back rubs can be enormously helpful for some kids. In terms of younger and younger kids, back rubs can be really, if your child responds to it. Some kids are so hypersensitive, that isn't going to work, so don't try it. We find that a lot of children, fascinating, University of California, Davis said, for kids low on the language scale level, try sign language. And even with a sign that they would get that's just between you and the child, but come up with their own unique sign. We're not talking about teaching them the actual what is sign language. Come up with your own unique signs, because the child can then sign it back. And we've discovered if you use the same word with the sign, I don't care if the child is 10 or 2, it actually can increase the language and help you two communicate with one another. That could be an idea. I remember doing that with an autistic child, and it was just glorious because that was the only way we could connect. But he had a little bit of that he could use. UCLA studies are now using, with some kids, mirrors. And it says helping the child look in the mirror, see when, because very often their facial expressions don't read the most pleasant facial expressions for another friend, and they don't realize it. So what they're doing is teaching the child what their facial muscles feel like, seeing it, and then switching it that way. Again, there's a lot of stuff here, cool new things that are coming out, but not everything works for every child. It's figuring out what works for your kid, and then keep doing it as a habit so that they can thrive a little more.
Well, I love those suggestions. And also, just to add to that, is we have a lot of parents of younger kids, and when kids are really struggling with emotional regulation, it tends to be in those, early preschool years, early elementary school years. And so also just that reminder that a lot of this is consistency and really becoming fluent in our kids, and just continuing to show up, to model, to do this work. Do you find that they get there with that kind of?
Yes, I would say the single most important takeaway when I look at hours and hours of watching with parents with kids who are really struggling is the parent who didn't do too much, but zeroed it in on maybe one strategy, being calmly consistent and just keep doing it over and over and over again. Usually it's the modeling, not telling the kid, but modeling, here's what it looks like. Let's do it again. Let's do it together. And when you see that, don't give up on it, because it's going to take a lot more time to be able to turn it into a habit or as a reminder. As long as it takes is where your goal is.
Thank you.
Love that consistency.
Yeah. So someone just posted an interesting question in the Facebook group about facial cues and the challenges of doing that right now when so many people are wearing masks. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Challenges. As soon as I said that, I went, wow, this is like one more thing that's becoming the challenge. Now, again, you can do that in your own home. So don't overlook the opportunities together. And at this point, there's another one. I spent a lot of time, Debbie, working in the Middle East, and I was complete burqas with only eyes. And I was like, how am I going to communicate with some of them? And I realized now it's hand gestures. So it's more with your little guys waving. When you're in the home, smiling. In fact, they've discovered that the 3 most highly correlated traits of well-liked kids are the ones we can do over and over with our kids. Hello and hi. We can still do that. A smile, what's it look like? And keep doing that in your own home. And an encourager. Interestingly enough, like just teaching your child not to say anything, but it could be a high five or a thumbs up or this. Those can be at least beginning connectors with the child.
That's great. Thank you. So a couple questions here about how to help kids be resilient when we are not resilient ourselves, or consistently showing up as that calm person when we are dysregulated. What would you say to those parents?
I would say, yay, and you get spa treatment because you admitted it. I think the first thing is, let's take some great ownership that it's a tough time to this vulnerability to say, I'm not the most calm parent, and we're not. Anybody who says they are, The second thing is you do exactly what you do with your child. You'd say to yourself, what are my signs that tell me I'm getting on edge? The biggest thing we do for the kid, it's like, let me just give you this analogy. It's Walmart, and it's around Christmas time. It's the toy store aisle, and all the kids having the exorcism, and the mom saying, calm down. And it's, you waited too late. You have those split-second moments. So I'd say take thrivers, take self-control, but use it for which one are you going to do for yourself? Start with yourself. And I would think the most important thing we can do as a group of parents, moms, is say, what are my signs that tell me I'm starting to get on edge? Because a lot of our kids are hypersensitive, and they read that so quickly. And so well, they can't verbalize it. They can sure go with it. And that becomes really a habit. Fascinating thing, Debbie, is too, you've got an amazing little village going. And what they discovered about women, this is University of Santa Cruz, that if you come up with, okay, here's what I'm going to work on. Like, I'm going to try to figure out what my stress signs are, or I'm going to try to reduce my own stress. And you tell another girlfriend, not a guy, but a woman, chances are you're far more likely to be successful at your goal, because that becomes your accountability partner. And she'll keep saying, so are you working on it? How are you doing today? I don't think we use enough of each other to support each other and say, this is really hard for me. I'm struggling. Can you help me? And then keep calling up and saying, are you doing it? Coach the other mom, because we're going through some tough times together.
Yeah, one of the things we do in this group is every Monday I post an intention thread, and I invite parents to share their intention for the week, how they're going to show up. And then we check in on Fridays, but I love that building in more accountability. Let me just ask you a question about resilience too that came up. So you say that thrivers are made, not born, which is great news for all of us watching this. And is that true for adults too? For adults who wouldn't identify as being resilient, or maybe didn't have that support with their own parents?
What I'm seeing is that the big reason why some of us don't have that sense of resilience is we're minus the skill set. For instance, on the Today Show, they asked me, what's going on with, why are so many kids so lacking in it? And across the board, what's happening is I think we put so darn much time and energy into our kids' GPA and test score skill set that we're missing the other part. Now, the other thing is, you may have, as we're growing up, lacking those protective buffers that we're taught, or that incredible person in your life that was that caring champion. That's why kids need it so much. Emmy Warner was so clear that it was one person, if not the parent, and a lot of us didn't have the parent. We grew up in a very abusive home or trauma. So we had to have great Aunt Sally, or maybe there was one teacher. But we do know that it's never too late. We do know that resilience is something we can teach ourselves. If it's not DNA and it's made up of a skill set, and we look at those 7 traits that are the most highly correlated, then which one seems to be the ones you're missing? And for heaven's sakes, don't start with the missing one. Start with which one is your strength. Because we do too much trying to fix each other and go, wow, I'm good at that one. And then say, I'm going to take this slowly, because this is not overnight. Let's take it slowly, and let's try to figure out how to help it so that the next time adversity comes, let's face it, it's a tough, uncertain world. I'm going to be able to flow with it a little more.
Yeah, that's great. I'm just going to interject one more time, because we're probably going to wrap up shortly, because Michelle's got a very busy schedule. So if you do have a burning question, post it now. But I do want to say, I love that you talked about and reminded us to start with strengths, which is not where we tend to immediately go and put our attention towards. And again, one of the downloads that Michelle has made available, which you can find on the show notes page, it is in Thrivers. It's an assessment of strengths, and I took it when I first got the book, and then preparing for the interview. I took it with my son in mind, and it was so insightful, and it's so wonderful to just really, look at all the incredible things, right, that our kids have, these incredible unique strengths, and really made me think about things in a different way. So I encourage all of you guys to check that out. I wanted to just touch back on my favorite trait, which is curiosity. I mean, you say that thrivers are out of the box thinkers. That is absolutely how I would describe the kids that we are raising in this community. So
yes, Debbie, yes. They are, and I think some of the most curiously creative kids were in those classes, and I'd go, they're being untapped. Nobody's zeroing in and looking at what makes them thrive and get so excited. And so I think the key is watch your child. You will be immensely shocked that sometimes when they don't know that you're watching, what turns them on? It could be nature, it could be sand, it could be water, it could be art. I think a lot of times too, we undermine by not giving them enough opportunities, by sharing different kinds of things to find out what they gravitate towards, where they're interested in, where's their tone of their voice when they sound a little bit more excited. Because once you keep that open, I think that's one of the greatest thriving strengths that I've ever seen. Emmy Werner says for resilience, that when that child finds that joy, which very often isn't what we're joyous about. That's the other thing we got to be prepared for. It very often counters what we're doing. I'll tell you a story about that one. That's what they decompress with. They need that to be able to go, when I'm really having a tough time, they rely on that strength areas to help them calm down. What we try to do is give them the glitter jar, or here's the bubble blowing, or here's some music, but maybe that isn't what helps your child. And one of the most wonderful things we can do as parents is try to figure out what works for our kid.
Mhm.
Once we do, don't stop. Keep helping that child find that strength and say, here's what helps. Some kids are soothers. They like softness. Other kids don't like the touch. You've got to figure out what works for your kid and keep going with that. Because pretty soon what will happen is your child will be able to finally figure out that's what helps me.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Again, so in alignment with this idea that I'm always talking about, like become fluent in your child's language, which isn't always a verbal language. It's the way that they show up, the way that they express everything and what kind of sparks them. So there's a conversation going on here about education. I know that you also created a discussion guide for educators, which made me I read through the whole thing. I loved it so much. And so what people are talking about is this idea of schools often, the system in schools killing intrinsic motivation, points, tokens, especially again within this community. So I'm just wondering, what are your hopes for the educators and the work that you're doing that could address some of those disparities or challenges for us?
All right, I'll be tactful.
Okay.
My hope, Debbie, is that we follow the science, because we know tokens kill creativity. You want a creative kid, don't give him a token, because he'll stop doing what it is. My goal when I was writing Thrivers was to actually, and I got the opportunity to do this, fly around the world and find the best places for it. One of the most amazing schools I've ever seen in my life was in Beirut. That was the Reggio Emilia School for preschool children. And the entire why I loved it, it was so child driven. It was unbelievable. They followed the child's strengths. They followed their leads. And I've never seen such happier kids in my life. Some of the most amazing experiences ever. So that was the first thing. The second thing is back to the discussion guide. It's free. It's a downloadable. It's 17 pages. I'm trying to get parents and teachers to connect together. We're in this together, and we've got to be on the same page together. And so that's for educators to start the discussions. I'm doing webinars almost daily with schools on showing them, here's the strengths. Let's flip this over. Gosh, I just got hired by the state of California. We're doing book clubs reads for across the state on trying to get parents and schools to see eye to eye. Even Florida, the First Lady of Florida is embracing this and let's do resilience across Florida. Maybe there's a little bit of a silver lining to the pandemic, is that we know that our children need something more. It doesn't mean we're going to stop helping them be successful in a school. That's not what this is. It's meaning two skill sets. One is knowledge. The other is living successfully the best you can wherever you are, so you do thrive. And that's what the book's all about.
So great. I'm so grateful that you're doing that work. That just makes me so happy. And I really hope educators continue to embrace this, and that school systems bring you in. And that 17-page guide for educators, that is something available on your website, correct?
It is, and you can take it off of yours and put it on yours if you want, if it's easier for them to download it for you. I'm trying to get the word out. I'll put up as many free resources as I can. Just please pass them on to somebody else to get everybody, ideally talking the same language, that enough is enough. Let's get science-driven stuff that maximizes our kids' potential.
Excellent. Thank you. And I will have a link in here. But again, Michelle's website is micheleborba.com. And that's Michelle, 1L Michelle, just like my sister, 1L Michelle. So I'll put that in here as well. And then just one kind of fun question as we wrap this up. And first of all, I just want to thank you for just sharing.
You're an absolute joy. I could talk to you for years.
Yeah.
Best friend.
So I know from behind the scenes that, first of all, I know you've written more than 20 books. I know that you had said you were done writing books, and then here you were writing this one. I just want to know what's next for you.
Oh, what's next for me? Honestly, I'm so passionate about this topic. And the reason I'm passionate about the topic is because I also interviewed 100 kids when I was writing it. And the interviews with the kids, I'd sit there and have to take a leave all day long going, they were so heartfelt and so right on the mark, that says, we got to be raised more like, instead of just a product and a test score, somebody teach us how to be good human beings, because they're missing it and we are so stressed. Those were the best and the brightest. The kids that had IQs in the ozone layer, they said they felt empty. All children, I don't care where they are and what they need. We start at the level that they're at. We love them to death. We surround them there with our love, and then we help them be able to thrive to the best they can.
Thank you.
That's my goal.
That's awesome. It's a very lovely goal. We will support you in that goal. And
Thank you.
Again, I just want to one more plug for Michelle's amazing book, Thrivers. If you haven't listened to my interview with Michelle, we go into this more in depth on the podcast, which I posted in here. You can get some free resources there, or go to Michelle's website, michelleborba.com. Check out Dr. Phil. I'm sure you can find it on Hulu if you didn't watch it live. Congratulations. Thank you so much for stopping by today. And I will let you get on, because I know you got a busy day.
You're much more fun.
Week.
Thank you. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.